Hello, everybody. Hopefully, we can hear me. Gavin, can you hear me?
I can, Charlie.
All right. I'll refrain from saying if you can't hear me, say something. Let's get maybe some questions sent, just to confirm that some of the participants can hear us. Maybe we can post a question quiz. Chris, maybe we can post an answer saying, hey, we've started, and if you can't hear, or hopefully the video with the mouth moving will cue them in, and they might need to turn their volume up. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Charlie Holder, the head of customer success here at Hannon Hill, and we are hosting this webinar, and we are very excited to have Gavin from Little Forest come and talk about accessibility. We're going to have live Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit questions during the webinar. We can get that question pump primed. I'm going to moderate it a little bit so Gavin doesn't have to read through the questions and then get answers prepared. We want to get as many questions answered as we can today and get them on the recording. Gavin, anything to add before I turn it over to you?
No, that's great. Thank you, Charlie. Thanks, Chris.
All right.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. I'm Gavin from Little Forest. Nice to see some familiar names here as well. I'll be running the webinar for you today. So, Charlie, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Just going to go into slideshow mode, so I won't be able to see the chat or anything. So, yeah, let's get started. So, welcome. Today's talk is about taking control of your university web estate and working towards true accessibility compliance. So please use the chat to post any questions or comments, and also we can have a discussion at the end as well. I expect that we will not use all the time. I think the slides might take like 25 minutes, something like that. So yeah, quick look at the agenda. We'll just discuss the importance of domain discovery, how to audit your domains, a quick look at some top universities, look at some of the solutions and some lessons as well. So a little bit about me. I'm the managing director at Little Forest. We're a web accessibility software company that focuses on compliance and inclusivity for universities. So we work with a number of universities in the US, the UK, and Europe. Yeah, very excited to be here with you today. As importantly, I have 5 children and like going on holidays as much as I can. I'm at a user experience conference today in Denmark. So met some really good accessibility people here today. So I love the international side as well. So let's look at some of the challenges that are facing universities in implementing accessibility. I think if we look at back in a bit of history, the internet basically started in universities in the early 1990s, somewhere around then. And since then, your estates have been growing and growing and growing. Every research project has created a website as a home for the learnings that they've discovered. Much important, valuable information has been stored on the web of these wonderful domains that universities run. And many of these websites need to stay publicly active, either as ongoing concerns or in an archived state for reasons of the research and compliance. The challenge that this brings is that the platforms they run on are often massively out of date, and it creates a serious problem for you as institutions. So really what we're looking at is very huge digital estates. Often we are seeing thousands of websites. We're seeing hundreds of content management systems and very unclear ownership as this estate has grown over so many years and is so big now. And what this, of course, means is that there's a big challenge with compliance, with brand, and with your regulators as well. So it has led to, across a lot of your estates, a low quality and fragmented messaging, and this can equal a poor customer experience. So what can we do to help with this? How do we address this challenge? Well, what we found as a really neat solution is to create a web registry. We do this through a process of domain discovery. So the first thing we do is really work with the university to find as many websites as we can of the whole estate. The reason being that we want to actually then understand how accessible each of these websites is, what is the quality of this site, and then what to do with it as well. So what is a web registry? Well, really, it's the master record of truth of all the websites that belong to your organization. And it records things like the web address, who in the university is responsible for the site, and we can do further detailed reporting on things like how accessible is it, what platform is it running on, how secure is it, and so forth. We'll have a look at some of the example reports later as well. So why is domain discovery so important? Well, for me, the key driver here for what we do is accessibility. Also very much growing throughout the world is privacy through GDPR and other regulations like that. Security is always a massive concern. Quality is always at the front of the minds. We want to make sure we're bringing the best experience to our customers. And so are things like performance, and something that's been growing a lot in the last couple of years and shares a lot in terms of the standards is web sustainability, how to build and maintain sustainable web presences. So why domain knowledge matters? Really, you want to make sure that your institution is being represented in the best possible way and that the information that people receive is accurate and up to date. This will really improve your customer experience and help with things like security and also, last but not least, compliance with regulators. More and more we are seeing regulation tightening in terms of accessibility, in terms of privacy, and we're seeing more and more legal action happening across the world. So for us, the most important piece really is the accessibility of your web estate. And we find that if you have an accessibility first policy, this creates a usability first policy. So now for some of the fun stuff, we'll look at some of the top global universities, and we'll look at some of the numbers of websites we're talking about. So these are the numbers of subdomains that were found, and this is just a set of random universities. These are all in the US, and you can see a wide variety. So at the time of this report, the University of Wisconsin had 76,000 subdomains. 4,000 odd of those were resolving to websites. So the first number here, so for the University of New Mexico, we found 14,000 subdomains, 1,100 resolved to a website. Over here, University of Oxford, 93,000 subdomains, 5,400 resolving. Also, if you look across other places like Europe as well, you see very much the same story. I'm today sat in Denmark, and this is the University, Aarhus University, where I am today. We found 4,800, and this is a really small town in Denmark. Same in Germany, you've got things like 29,000 subdomains and so on found. You can look at here down in Colombia with a massive estate. So just give you a flavor of that, and we see that regardless of even like the age of the university and the location. So let's look at how bad some of these sites can be. So obviously we get 1,000 sites back for your university. And what we find very quickly when you start to click through to these sites, you start to see some really concerning pieces. So you'll see things like Google reporting this. These are not things you want your institution to have or your customer to experience. So these are reasons why we need to manage the estate and start to really control how many sites you have in your organizations. So question I'm always asked, how do we do the domain discovery? The initial approach is done in two ways. We do what's called a vertical domain correlation. And with that, we will look at your main domain and we look at the subdomains. We find as many subdomains of your main domain as possible. This is the key thing to do, I believe, in terms of starting. Often you'll get so much data back. You'll find so many websites here that you want to spend some time actually just focusing on that. If you want, you can then do what we call a horizontal domain discovery. Doesn't take too long either, but you take each of these verticals and then you do the same process and you look for the subdomains of all of the other top level domains that you own. These two combined can lead to a very large number of sites to manage. So where do we get the data from? Firstly, we look at DNS entries. Our software then also looks at SSL certificate entries, and we also look at unique search engine results. We take these and we get then a unique list, and then we will rerun that once a month to get, how many are newly created and if any of the subdomains have been closed down as well. So domain discovery data, when you get back your initial report, there are some serious quality issues because while the automated discovery is there in producing valuable data, it also has a lot of hay to hide the needles in, and you'll get back data like a machine sitting under a desk somewhere or a printer in the university. And you might find that you get, so for one particular university we did in the US, we had 8,000 subdomains beginning with this DHCP. Now, these are not useful for your overall audit. And what we want to do with this kind of data is then hide that from your report so that it's no longer present. So you really want to, the next step is once you've got the number of sites, we want to clean up the data. So we know everyone will have a domain management tool. Do they solve the issues of domain discovery? Well, there's several parts they don't focus on. They don't focus on subdomains. They don't focus on the ownership. They don't allow you to ignore rules at the automated review stage. And what they don't do is keep a version history of change either. It's important to understand if maybe in January, the accessibility score of your site was 50%, but in April, you've done some improvements and now it's at 75%. They also don't provide then quality measurement reporting. Let's look at some of the useful reports a web registry can give you. So here's an example, and just using our own domain here. You've got the domains, you get the status code back, you can assign a site owner for each of the sites, and you can also do things like categorize each of the sites. So what's the next step we want to do? It might be that you have some sites that urgently need to be closed down, often seen that as being the case. And you can then add multiple columns in here for other data points that you would like. So typically what we'll do is often show a screenshot as well of the domain, so you get a visual idea of what is going on there. You can also visualize your domains. Once you've then categorized them into business areas, you can then visualize those in different ways to see how much of your estate is across the different business areas in the university. Other types of useful reports that people run are what CMS is the platform running on, what version of the CMS, how many accessibility errors are there SSL certificate issues, what is your performance score, what is the SEO score, what is your best practices score. You can also create custom reporting, and you can look for things like, do we have an accessibility policy on this website? Do we have, a link to our terms and conditions? Is the data protection linked to as well? And so forth. Each of these is customizable, and you can do what we call a code search, which is a really nifty way of doing a custom report across your whole estate. You could look for, if you found that there's a particular carousel or a plugin, and you know that is not accessible and it's not compliant with your needs, then you can look for that piece of code across, and we'll tell you which of the sites that you have that code is on. Just some more detail about the SSL certificate checking that you can do as well. So here's an example of the screenshots. You can extend the screenshots as well to get a bigger, clearer picture. And we'll pull out things like the page title. Also, if we find email addresses on the pages, we'll pull those out. This is really helpful for you so that you've got a starting point of someone to write to and say, by the way, we've noticed you've got this website running under the main university domain. Do you know that it's got a few accessibility challenges, and we have to comply with WCAG regulations or the Section 508 regulations? And you can then communicate with the site owners, and that's the sort of data that we're looking to help you get. We also keep a full version history. So each time we analyze the site automatically with our Spider, we keep a version history, and you can see how the previous version is to the current version. So what's the ultimate goal with this, and what's our purpose? Well, we are really looking to migrate the least accessible and most important sites onto new platforms. And, it's important that those platforms can then provide an improved, accessible, and compliance experience. For us, this is the main aim. So it's always good to keep that goal in mind. I thought I'd also share some important learnings on our journey so far. Really, what we're looking is to help you stay informed and in control of your entire web estate. We want you to understand the quality levels and accessibility levels of your websites. We want you to help be able to monitor your customer experience by eliminating rogue sites, and also to save time via automation and monitoring changes for you. Once you've got your registry, you can agree ownership of the sites within your organization, and you can improve communication and control across your digital organization. Some best practices that we're seeing with some of the large universities that are doing this is to place responsibility into the hands of the content editors, and really to offer training to and in accessibility across everyone who can update sites. What you want to do is put your editors put accessibility as a part of your editors' performance appraisals, so that it's a skill set that if they're trained on, they will also then enjoy getting really good at. We've found that also working with students with disabilities to test for accessibility has been a particularly successful program and a way to approach things. And also then finally here, even in the UK, where historically we've had less legal action happening around accessibility, we started last year that universities were receiving letters from the government saying that they had to fix accessibility challenges. They were given 12 weeks to comply. They were very clear about what needed to be fixed. And really, no one wants to receive a letter from the Cabinet Office saying that they're going to start legal action if they don't fix their websites. What we've also seen in the US increasingly is people being sued for websites that aren't their main website. So just for another side site, maybe a site that no one had ever really noticed was there. And we're seeing that happening more and more. I think we should look at the law as a positive thing, as it provides teeth for web accessibility. So site owners can really understand that they are responsible for their websites being accessible. And this is key because we've got a lot of site owners, we've got a lot of sites, there's a lot of communication that needs to happen. So 3 quick lessons. Your central team, who typically will manage your main platform and your main site, can't manage a web registry entirely on their own. There are so many people that need to be involved because of the numbers of their sites. So what we recommend doing is setting up different views, and you might create a view for a particular college. It might have 50 sites in there, and you then just simply train people to curate that list of sites. Every couple of months, go in and see and confirm, these are my sites. Maybe identify any sites that are not assigned and review those as well. We recommend that you should create rules to automatically categorize your URLs based on patterns. So for example, if you know that maths dot is always going to belong to the maths department, then you can assign that automatically as well. We recommend an unassigned list, and you can then say, so this is where all of the sites that don't have an owner are, and you can get people to review that regularly in order to hopefully find an owner for those. So what we're offering as part of the webinar today is that you can get a free domain discovery report from us. We will also review that with you on a screen share. You can email me, gavin@littleforest.co.uk, to set up the free report. I'd love to hear from you. Okay. Now we are done with the slides, actually. So that's on 20 minutes, and it's time for some QA. I will stop sharing my screen for a while.
Thank you so much, Gavin,
Yeah.
for presenting that information. We did get a couple of questions, and then I also prepared some questions just to help generate some more conversation. The first question that was asked was, will the slides be distributed after the session? Were you planning on hosting them somewhere yourself, or can we host them somewhere for you to maybe provide a link?
I'll happily send them to you, Charlie,
Okay.
either as a PDF, maybe that's perhaps best.
Okay. Yeah, we can certainly get those up somewhere where they will be able to be linked to from any kind of recap email that we send.
Thank you.
We also had a question about scanning for domain names. When you're scanning for some of the domain names, how are you determining whether or not they actually host a website? And do you also scan for other things like ports or HTTP versus HTTPS?
Good. A lot of questions there. So yeah, so we'll search on HTTP, HTTPS. We will typically firstly just look for some basics like a status code. If something comes back as a 200, then we suspect there's some sort of website there. Often we will find that a site will maybe initially redirect, then maybe redirect again, and then eventually resolve to a 200. I'm forgetting what the other questions were. You can do further port scanning if you want. That would lead to even more kind of data. What we're honestly finding at this point is the initial report often brings back so much that people kind of pause there to fix that and focus on that. But certainly in the same way that you can for security, we could take each of the subdomains and do port scanning on there as well. It's not something we've done yet, as I said, because there tends to be so many sites that come back.
Right. 15,000, 95,000 subdomains. That feels like a lot to me. I mean, been working in higher ed for a number of years, but and here at Hand and Hill, but I was also, webmaster at my alma mater for a good portion of time. How does that happen? How do these sites, sort of get to that point where there's just so many of these things that you are trying to wrangle and have to be worried about?
A lot of it is research, and it's the years and years that things have been going. Also, a lot of institutions haven't yet had a process around domain management. So there's maybe an easy way to just request a new website and the website gets created. And then maybe the person leaves the organization. So they put up a few pages and then move on. And no one really is there to review it again. And it just stays there.
Right.
So you can get into the thousands really quickly. All your PhD students, perhaps your master students as well, are creating a website for their research.
Right.
And then, yeah, so it really quickly adds up. My favorite moment is actually showing people their initial report and them just looking at it. And you get a lot of laughs, actually. People can't be, they're like, wow.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
We may have people participating. We may have some participants from different countries, and there are probably going to be some privacy, laws or things to consider in that regard. Can you talk a little bit about like how you store your data and where it's stored and things like that?
Certainly. So we can store our data either here in the UK or over in the US. We use a cloud hosting provider where we can select the locations. So we have those choices, and also in Europe as well. So if there's a need to store the data, most of the data we store is really publicly available. So the actual information we get back from the websites itself is all publicly available. So it's not typically a privacy challenge there. But yeah, as I say, we can spin up a server in the US, in Germany, if that's required.
We did have a comment from someone at Edinburgh that it's less of a question, but I think it's something that you can kind of talk about. John mentioned that they have an ambitious project for a new central website publishing platform, and they have a number of sites there. And so, like you mentioned, one of the goals in achieving accessibility and web governance is, really to kind of centralize all that stuff. And I think one of the questions that I had, kind of related to that is, many organizations struggle with being able to take control of that. Can you provide any advice for how you've seen successful organizations come together and actually sign like an authority for determining what the official policy is going to be?
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there as well. So we see each of the individual areas like accessibility or security or privacy able to, to create a policy. They tend to vary in how they work from institution to institution quite greatly. But yeah, absolutely having a policy is essential. The challenge of most of the organizations we see is that while the whole university is under the same kind of regulation and compliance, the areas of reporting are all different and the areas of ownership are different. So you rarely get one team who are able to tell another team or tell another department, you have to do this or we'll close down your site. In a sense, that's to have that kind of level of control would really help the organization to stay compliant, to help their customers. What we see at the moment is it's often not the situation, that the university doesn't have someone or some team that is able to have that level of authority that you often find in corporate world, which will say, hey, your site has to be accessible by the 1st of July, or we're going to switch it off.
Right.
That would really help the university to stay compliant and actually for people to take action. And a lot of the challenges, people don't take action. And yeah, I see that a lot.
Or we're going to pass along any penalties that we receive to you. Like, we've notified you of the problem, we, can work with you to fix it, or you can fix it yourself. But, if you choose to do nothing, maybe we pass along some of the monetary penalties to you.
That's it. It's certainly education is really helpful, making sure that as many people who own the sites are aware of the responsibility and why it's important. And so really to change the culture and get people to understand that is the best way, educating people, telling them about accessibility, about security. And these is the great way of doing it.
Right. You talked about, they don't even know that there's these other sites out there. When you do the report, they kind of laugh sometimes. And a lot of it maybe comes from research or, these defunct sites where somebody has moved on. In your experience, what would you say is like the percentage of the results that make up those like random, one-off platforms? We kind of saw like 95,000 subdomains as compared to like, maybe 1,100 that are actually being used. Do you feel like these one-off sites are more common or less common than like actual functioning sites?
So a lot of you will have an initial, a lot of what we kind of call noise, and there will just be, that's where it typically comes from, the DNS part. So that could be things like printers and all sorts, and that's why you can get a really massive initial number. When we then scan, we'll work out, okay, these bits are websites. From that, you will often find like the central site might be 20% of the estate. Obviously, it varies massively, but you then have a very long tail of dozens and dozens and hundreds of platforms. Because over time, people, when there wasn't so much control in digital, had the ability to spin up an FTP site or
Right.
get kind of server onto the farm somewhere and install something on it, or maybe get some cloud service linked up through to the university as well.
Right.
We tend to find a lot of platforms.
I remember 25 years ago when I first started, you could reach out to GoDaddy and have like web hosting for like $5. You could have them turn on a WordPress for you with the click of a button, and then you were off to the races, and all you needed was a credit card. So
yeah, and it's now trying to then, if that person's left the university, how to take back control of the domain name, knowing what to do with it. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you go about finding sites that are hosted on these third-party platforms? You know, if they don't fall under the same like literal domain name, you know, how do you really determine some of those other sites that, you know, may fall under that umbrella?
So what we do is look at the registrant information. So there might be like an email address or an address or the name of the university. And it's like a reverse lookup, and you'll then find other domains that are owned with the same fingerprint. And there's some opportunity for a false positive there, because particularly in the olden days with DNS, you could actually put almost any information in there, and I could almost claim to have your site, Charlie. Right. Like the DNS entry often wasn't checked at all. So yeah, but that's how we do it, is through the DNS registry.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about how doing these audits, you know, not only are they helping, you know, for accessibility, but how can they also help for SEO?
SEO, so yeah, you can do things like basically on-page SEO. So, you know, does the page have a title? Is it a relevant title? Are there headings? Are there multiple headings? So there's overlap there with accessibility as well. You know, are there keywords? Is there meta descriptions? So all of the typical on-page SEO pieces you can do. You can also get an SEO score for the page, which is then provided by Google Lighthouse. So that's Google telling you, okay, this is what the SEO for that for this page is, and that has other data on it. Yeah, that you can provide.
We had another question for someone who I think was looking at your site. There's a mention of integration with Adobe Analytics. What kind of insights does that give your customers?
So what that does is connect through to the Adobe Cloud and the Adobe Marketing Cloud, and it'll pull through example reports like line graphs and so on of all the key analytic information, like number of visitors, bounce rates, and so forth. All of the key KPIs that Adobe provide, we pull through the API.
I wanted to kind of circle back around to some of the best practices that you talked about. You mentioned placing the responsibility into the hands of the content editors, and, you know, enforcing training in accessibility, you know, and maybe other things at the same time across, you know, all of these editors. Knowing that the vast majority of content editors are not hired to update the website as their primary, like, you know, job function, would have been some things that, you know, you can say to them, you know, like what's in it for them, you know, in terms of like why this should be important, or do you think that just telling them, look, if you don't follow our rules, your content doesn't go up, is, you know, is good enough?
It's probably an approach of both sides. I think that's where the training really comes in accessibility, and providing that across the teams, getting people to realize what it's about, why it's important. Most people want to do the right thing. They want to do a good job. They want to be proud of the work they're creating. And often with content editors or web people, web folk, they are used to things like SEO and you know, privacy. They're used to having to deal with a lot of these different issues in addition to just what their content is about. So, you know, adding accessibility to the list is often something that they're very enthusiastic about, actually. And once they get trained, they then just start to do that as part of their everyday job, is doing accessibility checking on the content they're creating.
Yeah, I mean, accessibility isn't just, you know, for folks with disabilities that may require additional support, you know, consuming that content. You know, when you think about just being able to find it, you know, that's, you know, if it's inaccessible because you can't find it. So that's where that SEO, you know, really kind of helps. You know, maybe even the languages that you offer the content in, you know, depending upon your market. I mean, do you see a lot of that in the UK or in Europe, maybe with European customers, there's a lot more, you know, everyone's really close together. I mean, I'm assuming we have the same number of languages, right? But, you know, accessibility could also just be the way that you present the content as well. So how do you maybe talk to customers about the other types of accessibility?
Very much so. I think mainly with universities in particular, readability comes to mind. And, you know, you can get a score for the readability of the content. Often people push back and say, well, as a university, so the content's going to be difficult to understand because you have to be like highly educated. You know, I'm sure you've run into this kind of discussion. And it's important that actually content is as readable as possible. It's as understandable as possible. Even if the topic is really complex, we should really make it accessible anyway. And I think that's why readability is as important at universities as it is everywhere else. You know, you want to provide an entry level for people. The first point, you want them to get interested in what you're doing, and they have to basically understand it as well in order to get interested. So you want to really make it readable and simple, easy to understand. So on the readability side, we see that a lot, and that has a lot to do with accessibility as well, for all sorts of reasons. You know, all sorts of us need that. So yeah, it's definitely a big topic.
You mentioned getting a letter from the cabinet office. You know, here across the pond, you know, we have the ADA, right? And you mentioned Section 508. I'm sure a lot of people on the call remember in 2015, you know, with Harvard and MIT being hit with these, you know, massive lawsuits that were mostly focused on, you know, captioning online courses and things like that. But, you know, it really kind of, in a major way, paved, you know, the way for, you know, these elevated standards and these elevated policies that, you know, folks can buy into. I did a little bit of research ahead of time and found that according to one of the websites that I looked at, whoisaccessible.com, there were over 3,200 web accessibility lawsuits brought to the US federal court system under ADA Title III. And that just seems like a massive number. There was another website, the Bureau of Internet Accessibility, that reported in 2022, over 1,600 of those were in the state of New York alone, and around 650 of them were based out of California. And that equates to 2,200. So 2,200 out of the 3,200, you know, seem to just be out of these two states. And I know from, you know, my personal experience here in the States, California and New York and Texas are three of the big states that, you know, have a lot of policies and procurement rules in place, and for good reason. Are you seeing any places in the UK that are kind of cracking down more than others, or is there a country or a province or anything like that that you feel like is you know, not necessarily suffering, but, you know, what would maybe be the equivalent in the UK and in Europe as to New York and California here?
I don't think we have that, but what I would say is that not every institution got the letter, but maybe I would say in the region of just under half of the universities last year in the UK received a letter from the government telling them that unless they fix the accessibility errors on their site, they would consider legal action against them. And I think that was, so it was a very broad wake up, particularly because there'd been no history of legal action in the UK. So it really hit a lot of people, caused a lot of action, a lot of conversation. So it was really good. But it was definitely broadly across, you know, Scotland, England, Wales, everywhere. So yeah, but I've heard very much what you're saying there. A lot of the law in the US was particularly focused around New York and California, a lot statistically anyway. Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. How do you think AI might change the field of accessibility? You know, AI is a hot topic right now. So I was curious what your thoughts are about how it might affect your field.
It's a very contentious area in accessibility because there are some companies that sort of ride on this idea of automatically fixing websites with AI. There are certain, certain improvements you certainly can make automatically in the same way that we provide automated accessibility checking. It's great. The gold standard of accessibility is to manually test with people. And, you need to choose also what are the personas you're going for. Is it a person with a screen reader? Who is the, the personas that you want to test for? So the testing is a lot more complex than that. I do hope that AI will help. It certainly, helps in other ways with accessibility in terms of a lot of the ChatGPT, for example, it's text-based. So that's good for readability, good for screen readers. So it's helpful. It's a lot easier often to go through and find information with a screen reader through something like ChatGPT than to go through all of these websites and find the same information, many of those websites not being accessible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when ChatGPT first came out, I mean, I was typing in all kinds of things, but one of the things that I typed in working in web was, hey, give me the HTML for a really simple web. I just wanted to see, what it came out as, right? And
Right.
I think part of what it's doing, right, is it's finding information from around the web. It's sourcing information from a number of different places, and it's providing a good way to kind of do a search from sources that you don't even understand. And so to your point, I think that's why that manual testing is always good, because you can rely on automation, but sourcing that information might not always come from the best place. And as standards change, are you going to know that those tools are going to be keeping up with it? How quickly are they going to be keeping up as these standards change, or as new requirements come out?
Really. So while ChatGPT and other tools like that are fantastic at helping you to write great code, you can say to it, write me a web page with XYZ, and then you can say to it, now make it accessible. And it'll go through and it'll add all the right attributes, and it'll tell you what it's added and why it's added it, which I think is fantastic. You still have to take that code and test it. You test it with an automated checker, fix any errors that are there, and then check it with people. So in that way, AI is great. It's helped us. It's made us write the code faster. It's probably going to help us deploy code to platforms faster, and even run automated checking faster as well. We'll always need people to then actually go off and do the actual manual testing. Just to give you an idea, an automated test in accessibility would find roughly 40% of the errors that might be there. So there's a lot of other room for improvement. Automated accessibility testing where we are right now really doesn't cover enough to make your site accessible. It's the right place to start. It's always good to get people to manually test as well.
Right. I haven't seen any more questions come in. So my final question to you is, you mentioned on one of your slides, take control of your university web estate and work towards true accessibility compliance. So we have real estate, and now we have web estate. Gavin, are you going to be the first web tour? Like we have realtors. Are you going to coin web tour and then start? We have this whole new industry, right, that we can build around like accessibility, and we can hire web tours to manage our web estate.
Wow, that's a great concept.
What do you think?
I think the most important thing is, what I really want to see is that we identified 1,000 sites in a university, and we know where they are from an accessibility perspective. But if we can then make those accessible, if we can pull them over into a new platform or fix them in place, and that to me is the end goal with this. Yeah. So you can call that whatever we like, a web tour. That'll be good.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again. It's been really exciting. reading and, over your slides ahead of time and just being able to talk with you. And then, I love the information that you presented. And so thank you so much. Everyone who is a participant, thank you so much for joining. We'll have this recording and we'll have the slides made available to you. If you want to be notified of any other webinars that we do in the future, come and talk to us at Hand and Hill, subscribe to our newsletter. We're partnering with a number of companies like Gavin's who are experts in their field, supplying you with additional information to help hopefully make your lives easier, your jobs better. All right. Well, thanks again. And enjoy the rest of your week. And I hope the rest of your conference goes well.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Right.
Thanks again for the opportunity. Thanks everyone for attending and your questions.